So I wanted to start with this. This is a slide that we use a lot in Software Center, which is what is the essence of digitalization? Well, for me, the essence of digitalization is the transition that we see from systems on the left, which is I buy a product from a company. I see someone from AB Volvo just joining. So I buy a truck, and that truck gets a little bit worse every day I use it, until that truck is such an old, crappy piece of junk that I replace it with the next truck. And the next truck is maybe a little bit better than the previous one, but it still gets a little worse every day I use it. What we see happen in digitalization is something that happens on the right side. The day you get the product, it is the best you can build it as a company providing the product, but it is also the worst it will be throughout the entire rest of its economic life. And from that point on, it will get better every day a little bit by deploying new software, deploying new machine learning models, maybe periodically upgrading the electronics in the vehicle or in the product, and maybe even occasionally replacing mechanics. But the idea basically is, from a user's perspective, every day I use the product, it gets a little bit better. That's what has happened over the most recent years. Of course, if you are in the SaaS world, that we've seen for a long time. But in the embedded systems world, this is now really becoming a reality. Here is the thing that I worry about, and what I believe led to some of the questions that I had around Agile. Traditionally, if you would get a requirement specification and you would specify it, and you would give it to an R&D organization, you would build what it said in the spec. The assumption was that we would be delivering value to customers. And what I think the big elephant in the room is that this is an incorrect assumption. If you ask me, and if you look at all studies, but also if you look at our own research, basically of all the work that gets done in a typical R&D organization, somewhere between half and 2/3 of all the features in a typical system are waste. They shouldn't have been built in the first place because there is not enough traction there. We, a few years ago, did a study in the Gothenburg region with a company that wanted to stay anonymous after they saw the results. This is on the x-axis, you have a whole bunch of different features in the system. On the y-axis, you have the number of times this feature is actually used, and we see exactly the same pattern. Some features are used all the time, some features are used occasionally, many features are never used. So that's what we think is part of the problem. The second part of the problem, so what I'm basically saying, half of your R&D budget is wasted, you just don't know which half. The second half of this equation is the three-layer product model that some of you may have seen if you spent some time in the Software Center context, but basically we classify the functionality in products and platforms and in other systems as there is a layer of commodity functionality, there's a layer of differentiating functionality, and there's a layer of innovative and experimental functionality. And I've now asked well over 50 companies, what percentage of R&D goes to commodity stuff that you need for your system to work, but not something that will drive differentiation for your customer? And what percentage of R&D goes to differentiating, experimental, and innovative functionality? And the answer we're getting is that somewhere between 80, say 70 to 90% of all R&D effort in a typical organization goes to functionality that customers don't give a flying hoot about. It should just work. Yeah, the car should have 4 wheels. My mobile phone I should be able to make calls with, but I'm not going to pick the car or the mobile phone because of that capability. Yeah, so what I am currently seeing, and I'm starting to wrap up, it's a few more slides. As I can assess the current state of R&D in most companies, and I include product management in that R&D, is that 7 to 9 people out of every 10 in R&D work on things no customer cares about. It's not differentiating, it should just work. And the 1 or 2 that build new functionality get it wrong half the time. Sorry, I had a typo there. It should say half the time, HLALF. And many people are okay with it because they focus on the cost of R&D teams. And this is one of the other things that I see many companies struggle with. If I have a company that allocates 5% of its revenue to R&D, yeah, which is a little high for a company like AB Volvo, which I think is at 3.5%. It's a little low for a pure software company that tends to be more in the 15 to 20% range. But the question is, if you 5% of your revenue goes to R&D, How much revenue should every euro invested in R&D create? And the answer is 20 euros, because 5% fits 20 times in 100. And that means that every euro that goes into R&D has to create 20 euros of value. And this is where I see many companies struggle really, really bad. So you saw this on the LinkedIn post that maybe triggered you, and otherwise you saw it in the newsletter that I sent out. But basically what I believe is that we need to move towards the new paradigm. You know, the two columns on the left on your screen is traditional Agile, from process and tools to individuals and interactions. And I believe that the next paradigm needs to look much more into architecture and decoupling teams. It's not that we are not talking to each other, it's that we spend too much time talking to each other and we use too much process for coordination and too little architecture for coordination. From comprehensive documentation to working software to operational software that is tracked in real time, we can actually see and observe and measure in real time that the software is actually working. That's the whole data side to this. From contract negotiation, which Hannah knows everything about because that's how SAP works these days, to customer collaboration, to predicting stakeholder needs. We need to be able to identify what customers want before they're even able to express it. And from following a plan to responding to change, to becoming much more proactive around hypotheses and experimentation, that I think is important here. So what I believe is we need to shift from a focus on how are we building software to focusing on what are we building and why are we building it? From a focus on efficiency, how do we crank out as many features per time unit as humanly possible, to a focus on effectiveness, how do we maximize the amount of value that gets created in our R&D, from talking about value, what is valuable to you, dear customer, to actually measuring value, what gets used, reacting to change, which is very much the Agile paradigm, things happen and I respond, to proactively engaging with markets, customers and ecosystems, and then finally listening to what customers say they want to measuring what customers actually do in practice.